Welcome to the Golden Gems podcast. Today we're taking a deep dive into William Leonard Pickard and the planetary-scale synthesis of LSD from a decommissioned Cold War missile silo.
It is quite literally one of the most unbelievable stories in modern history.
It really is. So, let us set the scene for you a bit. It is April 9, 2026. We are just days away from Bicycle Day.
Right, the annual April 19th celebration of Albert Hofmann's first intentional psychedelic ride.
Exactly. But, the cultural landscape right now is fundamentally different from the counterculture of the 20th century. The psychedelic renaissance is totally mainstream.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, MDMA is sitting on the verge of FDA approval right now.
And psilocybin is running through those massive clinical trials at Johns Hopkins.
The hyperspace that earlier pioneers mapped out in the margins is now, well, it's the subject of rigorous laboratory study. The underground chemistry has basically become above-ground medicine.
Which brings us to the ultimate paradox at the center of this deep dive. We are looking at a man who allegedly manufactured like 90% of the global LSD supply between 1990 and 2000.
But he wasn't just some rogue operator cooking in a basement.
No, not at all. William Leonard Pickard was a Harvard researcher. He was a policy analyst who literally advised the DEA on precursor chemical tracking.
Right. He engineered acid distribution on a planetary scale, suffered a devastating betrayal, and served 20 years in federal prison.
And now he walks free as a senior advisor to the very biotech firms developing these new therapeutics.
We are doing a forensic breakdown of a man trapped between the laws of human society and, the forced cognitive evolution of the species.
To understand how someone navigates that extreme duality, the respected academic and the hunted chemist, we really have to look at his childhood.
Yeah, let's unpack this. It is like being raised simultaneously by the rigid architecture of a courthouse and the mutating reality of a petri dish. That is a perfect way to put it. He was born in late 1945 in DeKalb County, Georgia, and his domestic environment was split down the middle by two very different types of absolute authority.
Right. On one side, you have his father, who is a prominent attorney,
representing the absolute rigid mechanics of the American legal apparatus. So Pickard is absorbing rules of evidence and federal prosecution just sitting at the dinner table.
But then his stepmother was a high-level fungal disease researcher at the CDC in Atlanta.
Exactly. Studying complex biological environments. And crucially, she studied ergot.
Oh, wow. Which is the exact fungal genus that lysergic acid comes from.
Right. So he's raised where man-made judicial laws and organic cellular biology are discussed with equal gravity. It creates this incredible intellectual velocity in him.
He had all the markers right. Hyperintelligence, intense physical discipline. He gets a prestigious scholarship to Princeton in the mid-60s.
But he abandons it after just one term. The rigid structure there just couldn't hold his expanding psychological requirements.
So he plunges into the modal improvisations of Greenwich Village jazz clubs instead, then moves to UC Berkeley for bench chemistry.
And then in 1974, he pivots again. He gets a master's in public policy at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government.
Wait, he's simultaneously mastering the physical manipulation of LSD at Berkeley and advising the DEA on international narcotics control at Harvard. Was this sheer hubris, or was he intentionally mapping the enforcement architecture to build a bulletproof operational blueprint?
What's fascinating here is how this duality mirrors the exact timeline of the broader psychedelic movement.
Like Leary and Shulgin.
Exactly. Leary is at Harvard, Shulgin is inventing pesticides at Dow Chemical to fund his research, McKenna is in the Amazon. Pickard uniquely positioned himself to understand both the molecule and the state machinery designed to suppress it.
He actually published a paper in 1988, right, in the Journal of Forensic Sciences.
Yeah, detailing precursor chemical diversion. He was auditing the system from the inside.
And that theoretical blueprint from Harvard becomes physical reality through an unholy alliance. Moving into the 1990s, he partners with Clyde Apperson.
Pulling from the Grateful Dead's extended chemical network, Apperson brought decades of synthesis experience.
But the location they pick, they set up inside an Atlasy missile silo in Wamego, Kansas?
A decommissioned Cold War bunker. It was literally designed to withstand a nuclear blast.
We're talking feet-thick concrete, independent power, climate control. They brought in industrial-scale glassware.
Because the chemistry of LSD is so incredibly fragile. It's sensitive to light, to heat to oxygen.
Right, you need precise pH in entirely inert atmospheres, starting from that same ergotamine tartrate his stepmother studied.
And the scale they achieved there was just staggering, producing kilograms.
And a single gram is 10,000 doses, so a kilogram is 10 million bases. It fundamentally acted as a viral contagion of consciousness.
Decentralized distribution on a planetary scale.
Using a decommissioned Cold War nuclear missile bunker to mass-produce peace-inducing molecules is almost too perfectly cinematic. But logistically, if Pickard literally wrote the paper on DEA tracking methods, how did he allow such a massive blind spot? Why trust an erratic eccentric like Skinner?
Well, you are identifying the forensic vulnerability of all clandestine operations, the human element.
You always have to rely on someone.
Right. And Gordon Todd Skinner owned the silo. He offered a completely secure, off-the-grid location. But he was erratic, and critically, he became an informant.
He actually betrayed them, setting a trap. Which leads to the November 6, 2000 bust, Operation White Rabbit.
Skinner moved equipment into the silo without authorization, creating an evidence trail. Pickard and Apperson discover it, initiate an emergency extraction, and get stopped by the Highway Patrol.
And that gives us that wild image of a 55-year-old Pickard sprinting into the freezing Kansas agricultural fields at night, chased by DEA helicopters.
He was caught the next day. And the consequence of that human failure was a collision with the very punitive legal system his father represented.
But the math the government used in the trial is just, it's surreal. Law enforcement seized dismantled equipment and less than 7 ounces of ergotamine tartrate.
Right, just trace amounts of precursor.
Yet the DEA used complex mathematical multipliers to claim a 95% immediate collapse in global LSD availability.
They basically assumed a 100% perfect chemical conversion rate, which is virtually impossible in bench chemistry.
Yeah, then multiplied that by the capacity of the glassware and the years they had the silo. Here's where it gets really interesting. The government uses abstract mathematical multipliers to justify putting a visionary in a cage for the rest of his life, while granting total immunity to an actual violent sadist.
Yeah.
How does the judicial system reconcile that exact contradiction?
It really doesn't. On March 23, 2003, Apperson gets 30 years. Pickard gets 2 consecutive life sentences without parole at USP Tucson.
And Skinner walks completely free.
For total immunity, only to later receive life plus 90 years for a horrific, unrelated kidnapping and chemical torture.
It's just incredible.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this wasn't just about punishing Pickard. It was the state violently severing a historical psychedelic lineage.
Right, from Hoffman to Leary to Shulgin to McKenna.
Exactly. Actively suppressing the very molecules Pickard had studied at Harvard.
So he is stripped of his lab, his network, his liberty, but his intellectual velocity had to find a new medium.
He had to survive intellectually. So he writes the Rosa Paracelsus on secrets and sacraments in maximum security.
Over 4 grueling years, 654 pages of dense, visionary prose, using only a standard-issue pencil.
And constantly hiding the manuscript from volatile cellmates to avoid distraction.
The narrative explores the 6, right? Master chemists acting as guardians of human cognitive evolution. It's as if he transmuted the meticulous bench chemistry of LSD into prose. But what does this all mean for the ethics of it? He writes about chemists as guardians of cognitive evolution. Isn't there a profound arrogance in a few individuals deciding to alter the neurochemistry of millions without their explicit consent?
That tension is the entire philosophical core of his work, the heavy ethical burden of hidden knowledge.
Confronting rogue action versus societal benefit.
Exactly. It serves as the Ulysses of psychedelia. It stands as a monumental triumph of cognitive liberty against the brutal, concrete geometry of a federal cage.
And that intellectual survival eventually paved the way for his physical survival, right? Colliding with a global crisis.
Yes, the COVID-19 pandemic. On July 27, 2020, after exactly 20 years, Pickard was released under the First Step Act.
The court finally cited his age. He was 74 and his severe medical conditions.
Chronic kidney disease, severe hypertension, and posterior vitreous detachment, making him exceptionally vulnerable to the virus in prison.
So now we are in April 2026. He is operating as a senior advisor for the JLS Fund and Fireside Project.
Analyzing African root bark, specifically ibogaine, to interrupt opioid addiction.
Directly addressing the fentanyl crisis he accurately predicted 30 years ago while at Harvard. It's an absolute full-circle moment. The prosecuted becoming the prophet. But you have to ask, What does it say about our society that it took a lethal viral pandemic for the federal system to finally recognize the humanity of a man who spent his life trying to expand ours?
Well, synthesizing the complete historical ledger, we see the underground chemistry is now legal medicine.
And the rogue chemists are senior advisors.
Pickard walked free to advise the very renaissance he and McKenna predicted decades ago.
It leaves you with a lot to mull over. When the historical ledger of the 20th and 21st centuries is finally audited, how will we account for a mind that simultaneously mapped an epidemiological collapse and engineered the chemical expansion of tens of millions?
It's a profound paradox.
Does the brutal geometry of a maximum security prison cell negate the visionary mathematics of a molecule? Or does the sheer planetary scale of the operation render the laws of men obsolete in the face of forced cognitive evolution? Thank you for listening to the Golden Gems podcast. We'll be back next time with another deep dive. Until then, keep exploring, keep listening, and keep celebrating the power of uncompromising voices.